We're so glad you've joined us on the ERLC podcast to explore how the Bible addresses important cultural issues pertaining to life, religious liberty, marriage and family, and human dignity, and how we can walk in wisdom for God's glory and for the flourishing of our neighbors. If you're enjoying this podcast and find it helpful, please leave a review wherever you listen. This will help more people find and benefit from what we're learning together. We are grateful for the time you take to join us for these conversations.
The Bible calls Christians to care for orphans in their distress. One way to live out this mandate is through adoption and foster care. Let's listen in as Sharen Ford, Dan Dumas, Chuck Johnson, Emily Chapman Richards, and Becky Weichhand discuss caring for orphans at the Evangelicals for Life conference in Washington, D.C.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's our pleasure to be with you. My name is Sharen Ford, and I have a wonderful group of young people who are here to share a part of their story with you. First, we have Dan Dumas. And Dan is the CEO of Red Buffalo and an adoptive father. And then we have the wonderful Chuck Johnson, and Chuck is the president and CEO of the National Council for Adoption. And then Mrs. Emily Chapman Richards is the vice president and assistant director of Show Hope. And then Becky Weichhand is the executive director of the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute, a nonpartisan and bicameral organization in D.C. We're so glad that you would all come and spend time with us this evening. Each of these organizations have individuals working in them that know and love and serve God. But their organizations are very different from the outside for those looking in. Tonight we're going to have some questions for you to have a better idea about who they are and the things that they do on an everyday basis. So my first question is to you, Dan. As an adoptive father, what insights has that created for you about how to do effective work in the area of foster care and adoption ministry? And then that added piece about, and how does that affect the church? What's the church's role in all of that?
Fantastic question, Sharon. Thank you. I'll just speak personally first. I feel like being in pastoral ministry for 30 years, I was a bit of a kind of gospel tin man from Wizard of Oz. I didn't have a heart until I got in this space. It's like you go into this space and you work with vulnerable children and you serve in this space, and it's like my whole world changed. And I feel like, personally, it's affected me to have a tremendous amount of compassion and understanding. And even when I see kids and families and they're struggling a little bit, I just have compassion towards that because I know the type of kids that we're dealing with here and the trauma that they've experienced. So it has changed me personally from the inside. I mean, it has just absolutely revolutionized my life. And then I added the foster care dimension to that piece, and that really rocked my world. I mean, adoption was one, and done that twice, but foster care changed everything. Now, to the church, I would just say, it's more, to borrow Jason Johnson's statement, it's more than just a good thing to do. It is an imperative. I mean, it's in the text, Isaiah 1:17, James 1:27. I mean, it is our calling. I mean, this is what true faith, true religion really looks like. So, I mean, I would love to see the church in 2018 revisit it. And at the same time, I don't believe everybody should foster or should adopt. I just want to be clear. Yeah. Not everybody.
We'll be the first to agree with you.
Yeah, you better have a rock solid marriage, and you better have a rock solid family, because it's just complex. And I say it's beautiful, it's hard, and it's rewarding. Yes. And all three are in play at any given point. So, it's beautiful, it's hard, and it's rewarding. And so, I just think the church. But you don't have to be the one that fosters and adopts. There's so many things the church can do. I think the church in particular is at her strength at kind of preservation. Maybe I'm using technical terms, and sorry that we need to clarify, but preservation meaning at the edge of care before these kids are disrupted from their biological families. I think the church can step in there because they can deal with the whole person, the gospel, the life change, the transformation, getting in parenting skills that's rooted and anchored in truth. So I think the church ought to step in there in preservation, and then when permanency is not possible to return, then they step in adoption in that space. So, but there's tons of things you can do. If you don't want to foster and adopt, or you're too old, I don't kind of want to go back to diapers personally, but if you there's so many things you can do. Respite, you can do emergency temporary care. When an ECO happens, I mean, there's so many things you can do. You can provide meals, whatever. So there's just 1,000 things. In other words, we would say you need to get into this space. At what level and at what point, I'm not sure. In
there's room for everybody at the table.
Oh my, it's a massive need, So
Here.
I'm transformed. Never will be the same. And I think the church needs to be transformed. I think the church kind of gave it to the state, 1912, and that's a very unfortunate thing because kids never flourish in state's care. They never will. It's impossible. It'll never happen. We're good at one thing, safety. After that, permanency, it's a problem. So I just think we need to stay in the space that we need to be in, and then let the church step in where she is strongest, and that's in preservation and biological families, and then adoption, and even the foster care in the ad interim, which is supposed to be just temporary and small period of time.
Does he have a message or what?
Sorry, we're out of time. No more questions for you, Emily. You're safe.
So Chuck, you're an adopted dad. You're a CEO, president of an organization, and so you see adoption through a couple of different lenses. Can you share what your experience through your family's own journey has been like? And then talk about your role at the National Council for Adoption.
Well, adoption is in my DNA. My father was adopted in 1929, and although he never liked to talk about it very much, I'm sure that knowledge directed me and my interest into working in the field of adoption. And as a college intern, I started working for a license agency there in Alabama, and was there 17 years. And then 17 years there, and then now 15 years here in D.C. as an advocate for children. And so over the course of that time, my wife and I, we fostered a child. We adopted 2 children. And so that personal connection to adoption certainly informs me and my passion. But one of the things that I have to guard against, and it's one of my pet peeves, is that when you look at policy, you look at best practice, that I can't rely on my experiences as an adoptive father or as the son of an adoptee or even as a former foster parent, although that's part of it. I have to listen to many voices, look at the research, and all that coming together, I think, helps us communicate what we think would be the best direction for adoption policy and practice, both here on Capitol Hill and as it's played out across the country and even in other countries. But adoption has really been, I am here because without adoption, I never would have been born. So.
Wow. Emily, here you are.
Here I am.
You have 3 sisters, a couple of brothers.
Yes.
Your family adopted children from China. You are serving in the ministry that your mom and dad founded at Show Hope. Can you talk about the beauty that you've seen and the ashes that you have lived through? As I think about your family founding Maria's Big House in China, and can you talk with that? Can you share a little bit with us about that?
So our journey with adoption began in 1997. My mom and I took a trip to Haiti, and it was profoundly impactful on me, and came home and sort of tried to champion the cause that my parents should get involved in the space of adoption. And eventually was successful in my championing. No, God moved in incredible ways, and we found ourselves as a family in China in the spring of 2000 and welcomed Shoei into our family, and then following Stevie Joy and Maria. And so, like Chuck just said, adoption has been something that has been profoundly beautiful for me and my family. The conversations we're having, my sisters are now teenagers around the dinner table. Shoei's about to go off to college next year. What it means to be a transracial family in America in 2018. What does the conversations we're having? It's just profound. It's messy. It's beautiful all at the same time. And so I can't be grateful enough for what adoption's given me. You refer to the ashes. Adoption has also brought heartache into our family story that we were not necessarily prepared for on the front end. We lost our youngest sister tragically in 2008, nearly a decade ago. And so that sent us into a journey that we would never have necessarily asked for. But out of that, you referenced Maria's Big House of Hope. So the work of Show Hope is centered around adoption advocacy through giving financial aid grants to families that are in the adoption process. Adoption can cost anywhere between 25 and 40 grand, so it's a really expensive process. And so that's where Show Hope sort of stepped into this world to reduce that financial barrier between children that need to find permanency in a family and families that are willing to bring those children in their home. Through that process, we realized that it's not best for every child necessarily, or possible for every child to enter a family through adoption. And so what can we do in terms of care and support for children that won't necessarily be adopted? And specifically, we're involved with work in China because that's where our story is so deeply woven, and we've had the opportunity to expand work there. After Maria passed away, we asked in lieu of flowers if people would be willing to give money in her memory and honor to Show Hope through Maria's Miracle Fund. We are incredibly blessed and humbled at the outpouring of support that came in, and through that we was able to fund and build Maria's Big House of Hope, which is in central China. It's a care facility. We have about 250 kids there that have severe intellectual and physical disabilities, and we are able to care for them. We will celebrate 10 years in 2019 of that being open. So cared for 2,500 kids so far, 700 of whom we know have been adopted. So that's pretty incredible. Awesome. So beauty out of ashes.
Yes. Yeah. Becky, you've been a faithful servant at CCAI. And so could you share with us about your journey with CCAI? Who is CCAI? What do they stand for? What do they do?
Acronyms in the state.
Huge acronyms are big in state and federal government.
Are.
So who's CCAI?
Sure.
And what does that mean to you? And tell us about your journey about being in foster care and adoption.
Okay, great. Well, CCAI stands for the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute. We are a nonprofit organization, bipartisan, bicameral, and we were created by members of Congress 17 years ago to serve alongside and kind of come along as a resource to members of Congress and congressional staff who, as we all know, are very busy and have a lot of things that they are juggling, major issues, international issues, domestic issues. So we wanted to make sure that the voices of children, youth, and families, especially the experiences of children and youth who do not have families, are being heard on Capitol Hill. So our organization makes sure that members of Congress and congressional staff have objective information. Chuck mentioned all the voices. We want to make sure all the different forms of experiences and expertise are brought to the table as members of Congress are making policy. And we love to actually bring the people who have the real life experience to that table so that they can brief and explain to the members of Congress what's happening. So we've been doing that for 17 years, and we have some great programs that bring those voices and those experiences to Capitol Hill.
And your personal journey?
Yeah, I'm honored that you guys asked that question. I actually really want to encourage everyone here tonight to just kind of think a little bit about people that you know in your world who, especially maybe as young people, have a passion for justice. Because at a young age, I knew that I wanted to work in this field at a very young age, probably 11 or 12 years old. My mom teases me that I told her I wanted to go to law school and advocate for children to have families, and she thought, oh, sure, that'll change next month. But it didn't, and it was in part because my parents really affirmed that in me and kind of helped me track along in that direction. And so I really didn't waver very much from that goal and went to law school. I interned for Chuck's organization. And one thing I want to also say is that when I learned about CCAI, I was a first-year law student, and I had thought to myself, I don't need to recreate the wheel. I'm sure that there's people who are doing great work in the policy space already. And so I discovered CCAI through a Google search, of all things. And when I read the mission statement, I actually teared up because I was reading what I had been telling people for years was what I wanted to do. But the funny part of the story is that both summers in law school, I applied to work with CCAI, and I did not get accepted to their internship program. And I tell our foster youth interns, which is a program that we run on Capitol Hill for alumni of foster care, if you know that you need to be connected with someone, be persistent and keep reaching out. And so, I've been at the organization for 9 years now, and just very honored to get to work with the members of Congress and the people that we get to work with.
Wonderful. So next question is to the entire panel. When people think of adoption and foster care, it can sometimes have a negative connotation. How do we talk about children in these situations and give them dignity while sharing the reality of their situations, specifically using people-first language? How do we do that?
Well, I'll go first. Dr. Moore brought this up today, where he talked about how we take generic terms to group people into these categories so we don't have to really think about them as real people and who they are. And in the world of adoption, I know that that the way we discuss adoption sometimes really discourages adoption, particularly I'm thinking in terms of expectant women who are having to make difficult decisions about pregnancy. And to ask a woman if she's interested in giving up or giving away her baby for adoption is not really a good starting point to have a good dialogue of what adoption accomplishes. Every adoptive father or every adoptive parent has had someone come up and want to know where your child's real mother is. They never ask about the dad. They always want to know where the real mother is. And then it's also been, even because in our family we have children who've come into our family biologically and through adoption, they're always, and they all look like us. People want to know which one is our real child or our natural child. And so I love to tell them I don't remember. But
the natural and the supernatural.
That's right. And so we try to avoid labels. We used to talk about foster children, and now we talk about children in foster care. Sometimes, for the sake of communication, we might need to talk about an adoptive parent, but generally I don't think we need to put that adoptive label on there unless it's absolutely necessary. We don't need to talk about this is their adoptive child. So the language, the words that we use in discussing children and expectant parents and families who adopt and adopted persons, it matters, and we need to be very careful in how we communicate, even unintentionally.
I'll piggyback off of that. You tell the stories of who's your real sibling. When I came back to work after Maria had passed away, I had a really sweet email from a really well-intended individual, I'm sure. And her email ended with, "I'm just really glad it wasn't one of your brothers," implying that my grief was different somehow, which kind of rocked me back on my feet because I hadn't even processed through that lens. And so I think that Chuck really hits the nail on the head in the terms of we really have to be careful in how our language can divide the conversation when we have to be unified in this conversation. We in this room believe and trust in a God who spoke the world into existence, and so words really matter. And we have a book full of words that we're all supposed to understand and agree on the essentials. And so words carry power in them. And so we need to be careful in how we're telling these children's stories. We sit in a space when we advocate for these children where we are entrusted with a certain aspect of their story when they are discovering where their voice might be. They might be young and not have their words and voice yet. They might be in a system or a country where their words are suppressed in some way, and we exist in this really sacred space, and so we need to take that with a lot of respect and prayer with how we treat that, because we're operating in a space where we're telling their story now, but it's their story forever. Okay. And so someday they come into that story, and they're going to look back, especially in a world of social media and internet, where we can share their stories and share pictures, and this kid needs your help, or how are we going to help this family? We need to keep the whole story in mind when we share and step in this little spot that we're in.
Okay. I think they also want normalcy. I mean,
yes.
At the end of the day, I mean, they're already coming into to the situation with a disadvantage, and so normalcy, right language, careful, cautious language is absolutely crucial.
I'll just add, I think, not only the way we speak about them, but the way we introduce them in a room. You don't have to necessarily announce that they've experienced foster care or are adopted. Sometimes it's just good to be, like you said, normal in the room, and just very honoring of inviting them to say something with, maybe you have something to share in this conversation, and then let them be the one to bring up if they want to share that life experience with the crowd. So,
all right. So Dan, in your prior work on adoption and foster care, you put a lot of focus in mobilizing the church to partner on issues. What insights do you have about empowering churches to partner with ministries effectively?
Yeah, I think it starts with educating the church. I think she's a little ignorant at times, or has kicked the can down the road. So just getting the church re-engaged. I'd love to see that in 2018. Just let's revisit those texts. And if you start with Isaiah 1:17, it talks about learn to do good. There's all those 5 imperatives. The first one is learn. And so I was meeting with a pastor in Lexington, Kentucky, last month. And what I did when I brought him the numbers of how many foster kids were in a 3-mile radius or a 5-mile radius, to say, it's not just this big 8,600 number, but these are kids in your neighborhood, potentially in your church, So just awareness, educating, bringing them along. There's a lot of causes. There's a lot of justice that has to go on with the church, because that's her responsibility. So, but just the education piece of it, I feel like somebody out there championing and getting them involved, engaging them, and really trying to get their feet wet, trying to really get them kind of owning a piece of this puzzle, wherever they want to jump in the stream. We talked about, Emily, the stream there. Wherever you want to jump in the stream, just jump in and do something rather than nothing. But sitting back and letting the state do it is a huge error, in my estimation, a huge error.
All right. So Emily, talk a minute about TBRI. And what is TBRI?
All right. TBRI, you talked about all the acronyms that are important in this world. TBRI, Trust-Based Relational Intervention, is a parenting strategy. It's an intervention. It's holistic, attachment-based intervention, really, to meet the complex needs of children that experience early childhood trauma. We understand, we've heard many times from the stage today, that each human life bears that imprint deep in our DNA. We're made in the image of a God who is inherently relational within himself by nature of the Trinity, and therefore we bear this mark that we need and desire connection and belonging. And so children that experience an early loss in that connection, whether it be a loss of a biological child or abusive or neglectful caregiver, there is trauma there, and we need to be mindful of that trauma. And so what TBRI does, which is research that's come out of the Karen Purvis Institute of Child Development at Texas Christian University, it's as if our science and our behavioral psychology is catching up with our theology in a way, and we're realizing and understanding that trauma affects our children's brains, bodies, behavior, and belief system. And so how do we effectively engage in a way that can bring our children to experience hope and healing? We do that through the empowering, connecting, and correcting principles, which is the framework upon which this intervention method is kind of built and constructed. So it's helpful tools, it's effective, it's practical tools for parents, educators, any support system, personnel that it comes around a child that has been affected by early childhood trauma, whether it be through adoption, a foster care system, whatever that might look like.
Great. And I know that Show Hope provides scholarships, as does Focus on the Family,
Yep.
to a number of clinicians and educators so that they can go down to TCU, Texas Christian University, and get the training so that they can use that in their practice, in their classrooms, in their regular lives, so that children from trauma-impacted backgrounds can be made whole, can heal.
Right.
It's like a new lens. Once I was introduced to it, and it's like I haven't seen, and all of a sudden I got a pair of glasses and I could see, and it's like a lens that you see the whole system through, and it changes you. It transforms you. It gives you compassion and mercy and grace, and I mean it's a game changer. It was your fault too, by the way.
You start seeing those needs behind behaviors.
And Kelly,
going,
she wore me out. On the
But
phone,
it
she
also
just
lets you see you about how you can change
what do I bring to
That's
this
right.
to this narrative, and how is it?
It's brutal. Yeah.
So Becky, just recently, something very powerful happened on the Hill around the adoption tax credit.
Yep.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
And the role that your organization played, and how you use collaboration to make a change?
Yes. Well, you all may have heard of tax reform in the last couple months. We, as an organization, kind of keep our ear to the ground on the Hill. And about 5 years ago, Congress started looking at tax reform very seriously. And at that time, my predecessor, our former executive director, started to gather the adoption and foster care community together and said, listen, we may have a battle in front of us to protect this credit that is given to adoptive families after they adopt, in the tax year after they adopt. And so we brought together a group of 12 national organizations and 150 kind of organizations that were working kind of alongside of that core group, including Show Hope and including National Council for Adoption, and just started regularly working together and kind of figuring out what's our strategy going to be if it comes to this. So for 5 years, we worked together and prepared. We created a website, it's adoptiontaxcredit.org, and we aligned around principles. We worked with the leaders in the Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee. And then in October, November, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act came out, and it was introduced by the House Ways and Means Committee, and it did eliminate all the adoption benefits, including the adoption tax credit. And so we were ready, and we had a lot of families go through the website, record stories about how adoption and the tax credit had impacted their family, and it got shared with the members of Congress. But then we as a group also just worked really closely with the Hill and made sure that they were hearing the voices of the children, youth, and families who were being impacted by that credit. And it's a $13,000 credit in the year that you adopt per child. And long-term savings for the federal government, it costs a lot of money to keep a child in foster care for several years, about $25,000 per year at a minimum per child. So really the cost savings in the long term is a huge benefit to our government. And so we were so thrilled to have the support of Focus on the Family and ERLC, just amazing teams who really activated and engaged on Capitol Hill as well. And so I'm very pleased to share with you all that the adoption tax credit was reinstated into that bill, and it was preserved in the Senate version as well, and the president signed that bill preserving the adoption tax credit.
How much advance notice did you have? Did you have any advance notice that this was going down?
We were kind of following the signs, and so we knew back in February that if the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, who is an adoptive father, was saying they might be cutting it, was saying that we were probably going to have an uphill battle. But again, just the community rallied, and members of Congress listened, and that's what's so important. I really hope everyone takes that away, is that your voices are so important on the Hill, and members of Congress count their staff count the number of phone calls they get on things, and then as soon as they get to X number, whatever it is in their office, they bump it up to the policy team. So voices and engagement on Capitol Hill are so important.
Speaking of engaging politicians, Chuck, what are some ways that our attendees can encourage their elected officials, both at the state and local level, and even the national level, to best care for children in foster care and children who have been adopted?
Well, I'll just piggyback on what Becky said, that voice matters. We do a lot of spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill and work with the staffers, and these are very dedicated, intelligent people, but they're not experts on every subject matter, and so they love to hear, particularly from constituents. And as Becky said, every office has a number, but it's a low single-digit number, usually 6, 7 telephone calls or 6 or 7 emails on a subject usually results in a conference and a discussion of what the members' position on that issue will be. So you just can't really underestimate that. And if you're not voicing your opinion, if you're not discussing it, then I can guarantee you someone else is whispering in their ear. And so using your power to email or to make phone calls very much results in change. And that's one of the things, even as I talked about my experiences, my personal experiences, not wanting that to be the only arbitrator on which we decide policy, that's why they need to hear the diversity of voices so that they can really evaluate and take a position. And it's very powerful, and we saw it happen in an amazing way this last November. In a matter of 6 days, we were, with a lot of help, able to reverse a very significant change.
I would say voice is huge, and second, the power of story. When you use your voice, use it well. And I know I've read every letter that's come, every word, and to tears many times. I mean, just literally, or driving home and using that drive, all the way home, kind of weeping and just broken heart, because it's just really messy. And so I would say, voice and the power of story. Never discount the power of story. The gospel comes in story, and it's powerful.
And I would say it's free for download off our website at adoptioncouncil.org. There's a whole advocacy, how to work at the state level, how to work at the federal level, how to communicate, templates of how to speak on an issue. And you can go to our website and download that and use it for your own personal advocacy.
The power of your voice. Thank you all for coming and being with our audience today. Appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the ERLC podcast. Visit us online at erlc.com to hear the latest episodes or subscribe through iTunes or Google Play. And join us next week for a discussion on the gospel and the future of theological education.